Today, we're going to dig into how one single brutal battle back in 1066 didn't just change who wore the crown. It completely rewired the English language. It shaped the very words I'm saying to you right now.
So let's kick things off with a fact that sounds completely made up, but isn't. For 300 years, the kings of England spoke French. All the laws, the entire government, the whole power structure, it was all run in a language that most of the people in the country didn't even speak. How on earth does that happen? Well, that's the mystery we're solving today.
So where does a story like this even begin? Well, it doesn't start with a battle. It starts with a crisis. We've got to go back to a time when the English kingdom was incredibly unstable, all because the king didn't have a son to take over.
Now, you might think this whole England-Normandy thing came out of nowhere, but it had actually been building for more than a century. It all started way back in 912, when Vikings, the Northmen, settled in a part of France that came to be called Normandy. Then, about 100 years later, an English king gets exiled to Normandy. His son, Edward, grows up there, speaking French, surrounded by French culture. So when that same Edward comes back to England in 1042 to become king, he brings all that French influence with him.
And here's the spark that lights the fuse. In 1066, King Edward, the guy with deep connections to both England and Normandy, dies. And the most important part of that? He leaves behind no children, no direct heir. And you know what that creates, right? A massive power vacuum. And there were two very ambitious men just waiting to jump in.
So, two main contenders step into the ring. First, you've got Harold Godwinson. He's a powerful English earl, the king's right-hand man, the ultimate insider. But then, across the English Channel, you have William, the Duke of Normandy. He's a distant cousin of the dead king, sure, but he drops an absolute bombshell. He claims Edward had already promised the throne to him. The stage was set for a massive showdown.
The English don't waste a second. This famous image from the Bayeux Tapestry shows Harold getting crowned king on the very same day that Edward died. As far as the English lords were concerned, problem solved. But for William of Normandy, this wasn't a coronation. This was a stab in the back. And it meant war.
And that one decision kicks off one of the most chaotic years in English history, 1066. It's famously known as the Year of Three Kings, basically a brutal nationwide royal rumble for the crown.
I mean, Harold barely has time to get the crown settled on his head before his entire kingdom is under attack. And we're not talking about one enemy. We're talking about two full-blown invasions from two different directions happening at pretty much the same time.
Just look at this map, and you can see what a nightmare this was. You've got William in the south, getting his invasion fleet ready to cross from Normandy. At the exact same time, another claimant, Harald Hardrada of Norway, is invading from the north. And get this, he's backed by Harold's own banished brother. England was trapped.
So, think about the impossible logistics of this. First, Harold has to march his army all the way north to fight off the Vikings, and incredibly, he wins. But there's no time to even catch their breath. He has to immediately turn his tired, battered army around and force march them over 250 miles south. And who's waiting for them down there? William's Norman army, who are fresh, rested, and ready for a fight.
And all of that brings us here, to the climax of the story. The final showdown. The one battle that would decide the fate of England.
So on September 29th, just a few days after his huge victory in the north, Harold gets the news he was dreading. William's army has landed at Hastings. The southern invasion is on, and Harold has no choice but to race his weary army south to meet them.
Everything, the crown, the country, the culture, the language, it all came down to this. One single, brutal day of fighting. And that battle was an absolute slugfest. It raged all day, from morning till dusk, and honestly, it could have gone either way. But in the end, Harold's exhausted English army just couldn't hold on. Harold himself was killed on the battlefield, and in that moment, William, Duke of Normandy, became William the Conqueror.
Okay, so the battle is over. William won. But that still doesn't explain why the King of England started speaking French, right? This is where the real conquest begins, and it was a conquest of words.
See, William's takeover was total. He didn't mess around. He basically fired the entire English ruling class, took their land, and gave it all to his loyal Norman buddies. And just like that, overnight, the language of power in England became French. If you wanted to go to court or deal with the government or even the church, you had to speak French.
This created this huge language divide in the country.
You had a tiny, French-speaking elite running everything, and then you had everybody else, the vast majority, speaking Old English. For the next 300 years, the language you spoke immediately told everyone what your social status was.
And what's so cool is you can still see the evidence of this in our language today. Think about it. The Anglo-Saxon farmer, the guy speaking English, he worked with the live animals, the cow, the sheep, the pig. But the Norman lord sitting down for dinner, the guy speaking French, he ate the cooked meat, beef, mutton, pork. The English words were for the farm, the French words were for the feast. That distinction is 1,000 years old, and we still use it.
Of course, you can't keep two languages in the same country separate forever. Over time, they started to bleed into each other. They started to mix. And what's really incredible is that the basic skeleton of the English language, its grammar, stayed pretty much the same. But it started absorbing thousands and thousands of new French words for things like law and government and art and food. It wasn't a replacement, it was a fusion.
And this new hybrid language, born from that clash of cultures on a battlefield in 1066, well, that's what we now call English. It's fundamentally a Germanic language, but with this enormous French vocabulary bolted on top. That one battle is the reason our language is so unique and so rich. So it all leaves you with this one last wild question. If Harold's army had just held on for a few more hours, if he had won the Battle of Hastings, what would English sound like today? Would it be more like German or Dutch? It's just amazing to think how much of our modern world, down to the words coming out of my mouth, was decided on that one